No one in Maple Grove thought a wooden fence would matter so much. But the morning Daniel Harper saw it leaning into his yard, something inside him shifted. The panels were fresh cedar, clean and sharp against the pale winter grass, and they stood 3 inches past the old iron markers that had separated his property from the neighboring house for years. 3 inches was not much, yet to Daniel it felt like proof that even the ground beneath him was no longer steady. He had woken early that day after another restless night beside his wife, Claire, listening to the quiet space between their breathing. Their bedroom used to feel warm and safe. Now it felt like a waiting room where no one spoke. So when he stepped outside with his coffee and noticed the fence, the small mistake became something he could finally focus on. Across the yard, the neighboring house had been empty for months before Alina Brooks moved in. Daniel had watched the moving truck arrive 2 weeks earlier. He remembered seeing her step out, first dark hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, giving instructions with calm confidence. She had not looked fragile, even though divorce papers had followed her like invisible luggage. Maple Grove was a neighborhood of trimmed hedges and polite distance. People waved, smiled, and kept to themselves. Alina seemed ready for that kind of quiet. Daniel walked along the fence line, studying the gap where the old boundary had been. He crouched, brushed soil away from the iron marker, and measured again with his phone. The numbers confirmed what his eyes already knew. He should have felt irritated. Instead, he felt strangely awake. Here was a problem with a shape, a size, and a solution. Unlike the silence in his marriage, this could be fixed with a conversation. He waited until mid-morning before crossing into her driveway. He did not want to seem aggressive. When he knocked, he told himself this was about fairness, not emotion. The door opened after a few seconds. Alina stood there in a gray sweater and jeans, a smudge of dust near her wrist, as if she had been assembling shelves. "Yes," she asked, her voice steady. "Hi, I'm Daniel. I live next door," he offered. A polite smile. "I think there might be a small issue with the fence." She blinked once. Processing. Issue. "It's just slightly over the property line." I checked the markers. She did not step back. She did not invite him in. Instead, she crossed. Her arms not defensive, but firm. "I hired professionals. They measured everything before building." "I'm sure they did," Daniel said quickly. "It's probably just a small mistake." The word mistake hung between them. Elena's eyes narrowed just a little. "I paid a lot for that fence. Shouldn't be wrong." Daniel felt the first spark of tension. He was not used to resistance. Claire usually avoided conflict. Alina, however, stood her ground like someone who had fought for her space before and would not surrender it easily. "I'm not trying to start trouble," he said. "Maybe we can look at it together." She hesitated, then nodded once. Walked side by side toward the backyard, not touching, yet aware of each other's presence. The air smelled like fresh wood and cold earth. Daniel showed her the marker. She crouched too, brushing dirt from the metal with careful fingers. Their shoulders nearly touched. "It's close," she admitted. "But it's not dramatic." "It's my property," Daniel replied, keeping his tone calm. She stood, meeting his eyes. "And it's my fence." For a second, neither moved. The moment was not loud, but it carried weight. Two strangers guarding invisible lines in the soil. They agreed to review official documents later and parted with stiff politeness. Daniel walked back inside his house, feeling strangely unsettled. Claire was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. "Everything okay?" she asked without looking up. "Fence issue," he replied. She nodded absent-mindedly. "Just call someone." That was it. No curiosity, no interest. Daniel realized he had hoped she might step outside with him, share the small frustration, make it something they faced together. Instead, the moment dissolved. Over the next few days, the fence remained where it was, silent and solid. Daniel found himself checking it more often than necessary. He told himself he was being responsible. Yet each time he stepped into the yard, he was aware of the possibility that Alina might appear. And she did. One evening, as the sun lowered, Alina came outside with a golden retriever trotting beside her. "Milo, stay," she said gently. "Oh, wait." Dog obeyed, tail wagging. Daniel watched from his side, pretending to adjust the hose. Milo noticed him first and barked once, friendly and curious. Alina followed the sound and saw Daniel standing there. For a moment, they simply looked at each other over the wooden barrier. "Still measuring," she called lightly. "Still 3 inches over," he replied. A hint of a smile touched her lips. "You're persistent. I'm precise." She laughed softly at that, and something eased. It was the first crack in their guarded tone. Days passed with short exchanges like that. Not arguments, not apologies, just small conversations carried across the fence. Daniel learned she worked remotely in graphic design. Alina learned he was an architect who once loved painting but had stopped years ago. They spoke in fragments. Never too personal, yet not completely distant either. One late afternoon, Daniel overheard raised voices inside his own house. Claire stood near the hallway, frustrated about something unrelated to the fence-missed plans. Forgotten promises, small disappointments that had stacked up quietly. Daniel listened, feeling both guilty and tired. Their conversation ended not in resolution, but in exhaustion. Claire went upstairs. Daniel stepped outside. Needing air. Alina was already there, sitting on her patio steps while Milo chewed a toy at her feet. She glanced up as Daniel approached the fence. "Rough day?" she asked, her tone softer than before. "Just normal life," he said. She studied him for a second longer than necessary. Normal doesn't always mean good. He did not answer, but her words stayed with him that night. Oh. Daniel lay awake, thinking about how icily she had noticed his mood. Claire had not. He pushed the thought away, uncomfortable with its direction. The fence dispute became a practical project. They agreed to call a surveyor to confirm the line. While waiting for the appointment, they continued their quiet routine of evening conversations. Nothing inappropriate, nothing dramatic. Yet each interaction carried a subtle awareness. Daniel noticed details he tried not to notice. The way sunlight warmed Alina's hair. The careful way she listened when he spoke. The calm steadiness in her eyes. Alina noticed the tired kindness in Daniel's voice. The way he never spoke badly about Claire, even when frustration showed. One afternoon, Reen arrived suddenly while Alina had paperwork spread across her outdoor table. Daniel saw the wind lift the pages and ran without thinking. He held his jacket over the papers while she gathered them. "Thank you," she said, slightly breathless. "Didn't want your designs to wash away," he replied. They stood close, beneath the small shelter of the patio roof. The rain drummed against wood, creating a private sound around them. Neither moved back immediately. Alina stepped away first. "We should solve the fence before it turns into a war," she said lightly, though her eyes were thoughtful. "It won't," Daniel said. "I don't want a war." "Good," she replied. "I've had enough of those." The surveyor eventually confirmed what Daniel had suspected. The fence crossed the boundary slightly. Alina looked at the report, silent. For a second, Daniel worried she would argue again. Instead, she sighed. "I'll call the company," she said. "We'll fix it. You don't have to handle it alone," Daniel offered. "We can split the adjustment cost." She studied him carefully. "You do that? It feels fair." Something changed in her expression then. Respect, perhaps, or relief. "All right," she agreed. The decision ended the dispute, but it did not end their connection. If anything, solving the problem removed the excuse for distance. Now there was no reason to avoid each other. As workers came to adjust the panels, Daniel and Alina watched from opposite sides. At one point, a section was temporarily removed, leaving an open gap where the boundary used to stand. For a brief hour, there was no fence between them at all. Milo wandered freely through the opening, sniffing Daniel's lawn. Alina apologized and went to retrieve him. Daniel crouched to pet the dog first. "He likes you," she said. Maybe he knows I'm not that bad. She smiled, and the space between them felt different, lighter, but also more dangerous. When the workers finished and the fence stood straight again, Daniel felt an unexpected disappointment. The barrier was back, clear and solid. Yet he knew. The real line was no longer in the soil. It was somewhere inside him, and it was beginning to blur. That night, as he stood at his bedroom window looking out at the quiet yard, he saw Alina's porch light flicker off, for reasons he could not explain. The darkness felt heavier than before. He turned back toward the bed where Claire already slept. And for the first time, he wondered whether the real dispute in his life had nothing to do with wood or land. And he had no idea that the smallest shift 3 inches of misplaced boundary had already started moving. His heart in ways he was not prepared to face. The fence was straight now, firm and properly placed, but the space between Daniel and Alina no longer felt as clear as the line in the soil. The workers were gone, the tools packed away, and the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet rhythm. Yet something had shifted during those days of measuring and adjusting. The argument had ended, but the conversations had not. In fact, without the tension of conflict, their words came easier, faster. And with less caution, it began with coffee. One late afternoon, Alina stepped outside holding 2 mugs. The sky was pale blue, the air cool with early spring. Daniel was trimming a small hedge along his patio, pretending not to look toward her yard. "I made too much," she called softly, lifting one mug slightly. "If you'd like some." Daniel hesitated only a second before walking toward the fence. She passed the cup carefully over the wooden panels. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. The contact was accidental, light as air, but both felt it. Daniel cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said. They stood there, leaning casually against opposite sides of the fence, sipping in silence at first. The coffee was simple, not fancy, but warm. It's the kind that invites conversation. So Alina said, glancing at him, "Are you always this serious about property lines?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Only when life feels out of control." Studied him? That sounds honest. It is. He didn't mean to say more, but something about the quiet afternoon loosened his guard. Sometimes it's easier to fix a small outside problem than face a bigger one inside. Alina didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. Instead, she nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you think." The conversation moved from their work, hobbies, music they used to love, but stopped listening to. Daniel admitted he hadn't painted in years. Alina admitted she still kept sketches of her bookstore cafe idea in a drawer, even though she told everyone she had let it go. They laughed about childhood dreams. They compared favorite movies. The minutes passed without effort. Inside his house, Claire was working late again. Lately, she and Daniel shared more schedules than feelings. Dinner conversations had become short exchanges about groceries and deadlines. There was no anger between them. Just a quiet drift that neither had tried hard enough to stop. Over the next week, coffee became a habit. Sometimes Alina offered it, sometimes Daniel did. They never crossed the fence. They never stepped into each other's yard without invitation. Yet the wooden barrier became a place where they met daily, like a bridge instead of a wall. One evening, as the sun turned orange and gold, Alina asked softly, "Are you happy, Daniel?" The question surprised him. No one had asked him that in a long time. "I'm fine," he answered at first. "That wasn't my question." He looked down at his cup. The truth felt heavy in his chest. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Things just feel distant lately with Claire." He nodded. Alina looked away, respectful. "Distance can grow quietly," she said. "By the time you notice it, it already feels normal." Daniel glanced at her. "Is that what happened to you?" She gave a small, tight smile. "Something like that." They did not speak of her divorce in detail, but the pain was visible in the careful way she chose her words. Daniel sensed she had been hurt deeply. Not loudly, but deeply. He admired the strength it took for her to stand alone now. As days passed, Daniel began to look forward to evenings in a way he hadn't for years. He finished work faster. He checked the clock more often. He listened for the sound of Elena's back door sliding open. One night, "Claire noticed you've been outside a lot," she said casually while clearing plates from the table. "Just getting fresh air," Daniel replied. Claire studied him for a moment but said nothing more. That silence unsettled him more than questions would have. The next afternoon, rain rolled in suddenly, heavy and fast. Elena was in her yard again, spreading design sketches across a small table, trying to photograph them in natural light. The wind caught the papers before she could react. Daniel saw it happen through his kitchen window. Without thinking, he grabbed an umbrella and ran. By the time he reached the fence, she was chasing pages across wet grass. He held the umbrella over her while she gathered them, laughing breathlessly. "You're becoming my emergency helper," she said. "Occupational hazard of living next door," he replied. They stood close beneath the umbrella as the rain poured. Down around them, the world beyond the yard blurred into gray. The sound of water against wood created a small private space. Elena's hair clung lightly to her cheek. Daniel noticed but looked away quickly. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Their eyes met for a second too long. The air between them felt charged, quiet but intense. Neither stepped closer. Neither stepped back. When the rain eased, Daniel returned to his house slowly. His heart beat faster than it should have. He leaned against his kitchen counter, staring at the wall, aware that something had changed. That night, he dreamed of standing in his backyard with no fence at all. The emotional line continued to blur. Conversations grew deeper. Lena shared stories about how her marriage had slowly lost warmth. No betrayal, no big explosion, just years of small disappointments and unmet expectations. "I kept hoping things would feel different tomorrow," she said one evening. But tomorrow kept feeling the same. Daniel listened carefully. Her words echoed too closely to his own thoughts. He began to question himself more often. Was he seeking friendship, comfort, or something more dangerous? One evening, Claire suggested they attend a small dinner party with friends. Daniel agreed, hoping maybe a change of environment would help. But during the gathering, he found himself distracted. He watched other couples laugh and felt strangely detached. When Claire touched his arm, the gesture felt polite rather than intimate. Later that night, lying awake beside her, Daniel realized the truth he had avoided. He felt more emotionally alive during 10 minutes at the fence than an entire evening. Inside his own home, the realization scared him. The next day, he tried to create distance. When Elena stepped outside with 2 mugs again, he shook his head gently. "Busy today," Kay said. She paused, sensing the shift. "Okay." He stayed inside longer than usual. He worked late. He told himself this was the right thing to do. But as days passed, the absence felt heavier than the presence ever had. Finally, one warm evening, he stepped outside again. Elena was sitting on her patio steps with Milo resting his head on her lap. She looked up but didn't smile immediately. "Thought you disappeared," she said quietly. "Just needed space." He replied, "From me." The question was simple, but it carried weight. "From myself," he admitted. She studied him carefully. "Daniel," he interrupted gently. "I don't want to cross lines." She exhaled slowly. "Neither do I." The honesty between them felt both painful and comforting. "I care about our conversations," she continued. "But I won't be part of something that hurts someone else. I've been on that side before." Her words were calm but firm. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had not touched her beyond accidental brushes. He had not said anything openly romantic. Yet emotionally, he knew the truth. Something had grown between them. "I would never want to hurt you," he said quietly. "Then be careful." She replied. That night, Daniel sat alone in his living room after Claire went to bed early. He stared. At the fence through the window, it looked simple, ordinary, but it now represented a choice. He could ignore what he felt and let distance grow again. Or he could confront the deeper issue inside his marriage. Alina across the yard sat in her own quiet house, replaying every conversation. She felt the pull, too, the comfort, the understanding, but she also felt fear. She had rebuilt herself. Once she would not allow herself to become someone's secret refuge. Days passed in careful balance. They still spoke, but with more awareness. Their hands no longer brushed. Their eyes did not linger as long. Yet attraction does not disappear, because it is inconvenient. One evening, as Daniel passed a cup of tea over the fence, their fingers touched again. This time, neither moved immediately. The contact lasted only seconds, but it felt louder than words. Daniel's breath caught slightly. Alina looked at him, her eyes steady but vulnerable. In that silent moment, they both understood the truth clearly. This was no longer just neighborly friendship and the fence between them. Though straight and solid, could not protect their hearts from what was already growing. The fence between Daniel and Alina was finally perfect, straight and strong, but it no longer symbolized a boundary in the way it once had. The wooden panels kept the property lines clear, yet they could not define the line between emotions that had slowly, quietly shifted. Daniel knew he was standing at a crossroads he had not anticipated. Every conversation, every glance over the fence, every accidental brush of fingers had built an invisible path leading toward something he could not ignore. No matter how carefully he tried, he felt alive again, yet guilty alive because Alina made him feel seen, guilty because Claire was still in his life, still his wife, though distant and distracted. The reality of his marriage had been clear for months. He and Claire no longer shared dreams or laughter. The quiet that had once been comforting now felt like a weight pressing down. She moved through the house with a polite detachment, her presence familiar but distant. Daniel loved her in the way one loves habit and memory, not in the way one loves another human being fully. He had tried to convince himself that his attraction to Alina was just an illusion, a dangerous distraction. But each encounter pulled him closer. Alina, for her part, understood the danger too. She had lived through betrayal, had been hurt deeply once, and she carried that memory like armor. She had felt Daniel's attention, his care, his subtle emotional intimacy. And she wanted it, yet she refused to be anyone's secret. The fence had started as a simple dispute, had become a bridge. And now it was the silent witness to a story that neither had planned. Each morning she walked outside with Milo, feeling anticipation she had not allowed herself in years. Evening she watched for Daniel's presence, her heart beating a little faster whenever she spotted him on the other side of the wood. One night the tension came to a peak. Daniel lay awake in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing in. Claire had gone to bed early, exhausted from work and obligations, leaving him to wrestle with his thoughts. He thought of Elena's laugh, soft and honest, the way her eyes could seem to read him without judgment. He thought of how easily he had confided in her, of the warmth and safety he felt speaking to someone who understood him in ways Claire no longer did. The realization hit him sharply. He had been seeking love in the wrong places, or perhaps in the right place, but at the wrong time. The next day, he decided to take control of the situation. He needed clarity, a conversation that would not involve fences or small disputes, but the bigger truths of his life. That evening, he stepped outside into the cool spring air. Alina was sitting on her steps with Milo at her side, a cup of tea in hand. She looked up when he approached, calm yet wary. "We need to talk," he said simply. Elena's gaze softened but remained cautious. "About what?" "About everything," Daniel replied. "Not about the fence, not about trivial matters. About us, about my life, about the choices I've been avoiding." She nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind his words. She put her tea down and leaned slightly forward, alert, present. The wind rustled the leaves around them, carrying a hint of the approaching evening, and for a moment they were two people suspended in time, holding space for honesty that had been long overdue. Daniel began to speak, carefully but openly. He admitted the distance in his marriage, the growing emptiness, and the moments of loneliness he had tried to fill with casual friendship. Small connection, anything that felt like life again. He told her he had been careful, that nothing physical had happened, but that his emotions were no longer contained. Lena listened, her own heart echoing what he described. She admitted the fear she felt, the pull toward someone she should not, desire, and the careful boundaries she had tried to maintain. She explained that she could not be part of a secret, could not allow herself to compromise her integrity, but that the connection they shared was undeniable and meaningful. The conversation stretched into hours. Words were exchanged with honesty and vulnerability, their voices soft yet clear in the quiet of their backyards. Each sentence carried weight. Each pause carried meaning. And in the midst of their careful dialogue, they realized that what they shared was not a fleeting temptation. It was an emotional bond forged in shared understanding, mutual respect, and the slow recognition of kindred spirits. After that night, life continued, but differently. Daniel approached Claire with honesty, a difficult and deliberate choice. He explained his feelings, not blaming her, but stating clearly that the marriage had faded into quiet companionship without passion or emotional connection. Claire, though hurt, listened with composure. They discussed their future carefully and decided on a separation that was peaceful and considerate, avoiding blame and resentment. Daniel left the house, not in anger, not in triumph, but with clarity. During this time, Alina kept her distance, focusing on herself and her dreams. She revisited her plans for a small bookstore cafe, spending hours sketching layouts and imagining her future without distractions. She allowed herself to heal, too, enjoy her own company, and to maintain the boundaries that had kept her safe for years. Weeks later, when the air had warmed and the neighborhood blossomed into spring, Daniel returned to her yard, this time without pretense. The fence remained between them, but it was no longer a symbol of limitation. He knocked lightly on her door, carrying no documents, no arguments, just a simple request. "Would you like to get coffee? Properly this time?" he asked, his tone gentle but hopeful. Alina studied him carefully. There was no hidden meaning, no secret agendas. They were two single people standing on equal ground, free from past constraints, and yet aware of the emotions that had drawn them together. "Coffee sounds nice," she said, a slow, careful smile spreading across her face. They stepped outside together, and the fence, though still there, no longer felt like a barrier. Milo bounded happily between them, as if sensing the shift in energy, the change in rhythm. For the first time in months, Daniel and Alina experienced a connection that was not secretive, not fraught with tension, but open and full of possibility. The fence remained a backdrop, a symbol of boundaries respected and lines observed. But the invisible lines of the heart had shifted completely. Daniel realized that attraction, care, and understanding could not be constrained by wooden panels or property lines. Alina recognized that emotional honesty, self-respect, and openness could coexist with cautious hope. As they walked toward the local cafe, the afternoon sun casting gentle light across the street, both felt a mixture of excitement and calm. They shared small talk, laughter, and quiet glances, savoring the moment without rushing it. A step was careful but deliberate, as if retracing the path that had led them from strangers to friends to something deeper. And in that careful, deliberate pace, they discovered that the smallest beginnings, the misplaced fence, the shared coffee, the accidental touches could lead to the most meaningful connections. Their story, once marked by distance and hesitation, now unfolded with promise. The boundaries had taught them respect. The conversations had taught them patience. The shared silences had taught them awareness. The days that followed were filled with cautious joy. They met at the cafe regularly, talking about their dreams, their fears, and the life they were ready to live outside old constraints. Milo accompanied them sometimes, bringing warmth and simplicity to their interactions. The neighborhood watched, quietly, unaware of the emotional journey that had begun with a small wooden fence, a boundary both literal and symbolic. Daniel discovered he could love again, not recklessly, not in secret, but openly, with awareness and care. Alina allowed herself to trust, to be seen, and to feel hope for the first time in years. Their connection deepened with shared experiences, thoughtful conversations, and small gestures of kindness and understanding. Months later, the fence still stood, solid and straight, but it no longer defined the space between them. It was a gentle reminder of how life can begin with boundaries, disputes, and disagreements, yet grow into something tender, respectful, and deeply human. Sometimes the things that divide us at first, the arguments, the misunderstandings, the measured distance, or the very things that teach us where we truly belong. Daniel and Alina had learned that lesson slowly, through conversation, observation, care, and patience. And as they sipped coffee together one spring morning, laughing at some minor mishap with Milo, they knew that the fence had only been the beginning. It had started as a line in the soil. It had become a bridge between hearts. And now it was a backdrop to a story just beginning, a story of connection, trust, and love that neither had expected. But both were ready to embrace fully. Their pasts remained, of course, memories, lessons, and emotional scars, but the future felt wide open. And for Daniel and Alina, that openness was worth everything. The fence had taught them boundaries, but it was their hearts that taught them freedom.